book signing at the table outside afterwards if you so wish to purchase one of his books. And the person I'm talking about, of course, is right behind me. That's Murray Palmer, and who's going to talk to us tonight about his absolutely amazing career. It is the most varied aviation career I've ever read about. Here, all in Canada, almost, with one major exception. And it is an absolutely fascinating story, and Murray is one of our own, and we are so pleased to have him here this evening. So please welcome Murray Palmer. Aviation junkie, apparently.
Thank you,
Murray.
Okay, I guess the question is why did I write this book? Really the reason I wrote this book was because my kids and my grandkids probably don't even know who I am, to be honest. I was doing a lot of stuff and they didn't understand or know what was going on. I wanted to stimulate my grandkids to pick a dream and follow it. My mother was one of those kind of people who said to me, plan what you want to do, and once you decide you're going to do it all the way. Don't stop halfway. And they said the only person ever going to stop you from doing it is going to be yourself, which I have to admit is very true. And everything that I've ever had somebody stop me from doing, it was always me. So I didn't want to do that to my grandkids. I'm going to keep pressing the wrong button here. So, you know, I want to read part of this because I can't remember exactly what I wrote down. Anyway, I spent most of my passion, or my life living with passion. And for me, it has been. I've enjoyed this game as much as anybody can enjoy anything, you know. Anyway, as it says there, I've dreamed about all this for my entire life. I got about 20,000 hours. I'm airline transport rated, and and I've been a bush pilot, cross sprayer, water bomber pilot, charter pilot, medevac pilot, aerobatic instructor, and I also hold an aircraft maintenance engineer's category M1, M2 instructors. So when I was a little kid, my very first memories was when I was a real little guy out behind this old house up here, and I heard a noise. I couldn't figure out what it was. I thought it was an engine running, but I didn't know what it was. So I went out, and I remember it was a real hot summer day, and I went out behind the house, or came out from behind the house where I'd been sitting in the shade, playing with a cat, looking for what I figured was going to be my dad, coming around a barn or a granary, towing a tractor, or driving a tractor, towing some kind of piece of machinery. But that wasn't it. I couldn't figure out, because I couldn't see anything around the yard. It was moving. And finally I looked to where the noise was coming from, and there was this little yellow airplane came up and started to circle the yard. I'd never seen an airplane before that I knew of at the time. I was just awestruck with that, and that memory stuck with me to this day. So what I ended up doing, this guy circled the yard 2 or 3 times. I didn't know what he was up to, but I could see that it was a guy inside it, and he waved to me and I waved back, and I figured this is the coolest thing. I got to do whatever that guy is doing. Well, what he was doing at the time was taking pictures of the yard sites and selling them to the farmers around, and so that was my first experience when it came to even understanding what an airplane was. I was probably 4 years old maybe at the time. So my first airplane ride was in an Aztec when I was 14 years old. North of our yard, about half a mile, Trans-Canada Pipeline had a line running basically from Alberta across to Winnipeg, and then it went further east to Falcon Lake, and then it went south into the States. The fellow that was flying that particular airplane was a friend of my dad's. He had been a World War II pilot. He'd come back from the war. He'd gotten into crop spraying, and then eventually he ended up starting doing this pipeline. So I didn't know it at the time, but my dad and mom had set me up to go into Winnipeg, spend some time with my aunt, which I did basically every year. Get a week in Winnipeg with my aunt. And so anyway, my uncle said, come on, let's go out to the airport. Took me out to the airport and took me to the hangar where this airplane was sitting, and out walked Al Hansen. And I knew who he was, you know, because of my connection with my dad, and he says, I'm taking you for an airplane ride. So that was the beginnings of me wanting to learn how to fly. So as time went on, in 1967 I was finishing my last year in high school, and my mother came to me and she said, you know, I've got a life insurance policy that's coming due, and she said, what college would you like to go to? I looked at her. Wow. Talk about emotion. I looked at her and I said, Mom, I want to be a pilot. She said, what college would you like to go to? And I said, Mom, I want to learn how to fly. She said, what college do you want to go to? And I said, I want to learn to fly. So anyway, I wore down. And so in 1967, I was taught by 3 World War II combat pilots. Those 3 guys gave me more ideas of how to keep myself alive than anybody else had ever done for the rest of my flying career. I owe a lot to those three guys in particular. At the end of it, I think it was close to 50 hours. I had spent $535.50 to get my pilot's license. My mother had given me that. So that was really appreciated at the time. Anyway, later on, I didn't get my commercial pilot's license until about roughly the end of 1970. In 1969, I was living in Alberta, and I had this little Triumph TR4 here. It was kind of a dream, or a little sweetheart of a car that I had, and I thought, oh, okay, this is great. Except that it wasn't running real well, and I figured I was going to fix this thing. Where I lived, 2 or 3 houses down on the corner of the street was a gas station. One of the guys that I hung out with worked the midnight shift on this 24-hour gas station. So I pulled in there about midnight, and I said to him, I said, I'm going to get my car up on the hoist. I got a problem with this car. I want to try to get it running. So anyway, he said, yeah, sure. He says, it's been pretty quiet here. It was a 3-bay garage, 2 bays, one in front of the other. He had his car parked in front, and he had his 8-track cranked right up, so I listened to the tunes because there wasn't a radio, or wasn't a radio in the actual office portion of the gas station. So there was a hoist behind his car. I brought mine in, put it up on a hoist, and I found right away that that's what I had thought. I had a flattened gas line. So I thought, well, I can fix this. You know, I'm 18, 19 years old at the time. No problem. So I got myself a hacksaw, and I started sawing through this gas line to take out the piece that was flattened. And in the process, gas was running out of my arm into a pail well, first of all, it was all over the floor. Then I went and got a bucket to try and collect it. And in the process of doing that cutting, I touched the trouble light that I had hanging from the frame. It fell, and as it went down, gas splattered on the bulb, and it blew up on me, sort of thing. So the first thing I know is I'm in flames, and I didn't even realize it for a second, and I thought, oh, maybe I better do this stop, drop, and roll thing that they taught you in school. I did that, went down, rolled a few times, and got up and thought, okay, let's get this fire out in the car, and I looked down and I'm on fire again, sort of thing. So I ended up rolled 3 different times because the gas that was on my arm had not burned off completely, sort of thing. After I get the fire out, that hoist took 3 years to come down. You know? It finally hit the floor, but it had already I left it in gear when it was on the hoist. But by now the flames are completely enclosed, they're engulfing the car. So what we tried to push it out. Smart, the guy that was running the gas station that night, he had a brain that was working, because mine certainly wasn't by that time. He jumped in his car, fired it up, and drove mine right through the door. And that's the only thing that saved the garage from going up that night. Anyway, it's out in the parking lot. I go back in to put the fire out inside the garage. By the time I get that out, the fire truck was there to put the fire out. Cop says to me, he says, "Don't you think you better sit down?" And I said, "Why?" He says, "Well, look at you." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, look at your arm." Well, I looked at my arm, and from here to my wrist, all the skin was just in a roll around my wrist. I moved my fingers, and I could see all the muscles and everything working inside my arm. So I burnt all the skin off of it. I had mutton chop sideburns at the time. They were pretty much gone. My hair was gone. My face was all blistered up. But anyway, luckily, I didn't scar bad. Ended up, the cop says to me, "I think we better get you to the hospital." That night there had been bad accidents out in the Sarcee trails. All the available ambulances were gone. So he says, "I'm gonna put you in a cruiser and I'll take you to the hospital." So he put me in the back. Lights and sirens, I remember looking over his shoulder. We're doing 120 miles an hour down Memorial Drive going to the old General Hospital. They put me in there, they patched me up. At the time they gave me a blood transfusion and said, "Yep, go home and get your doctor to take these pads off," and away you go. So anyway, that's what ended up happening. Went to my sister's place and ended up eventually getting to the doctor and all the other things that go along with it. And after that, I healed up, I believed. So anyway, since 1969 to 71, I spent most of that time just learning how to fly, getting my build-up time, my commercial license, all the other things that I needed to do. I was taking that in Brandon at the time, and I needed to get a float endorsement because I had been told by a family friend that I could have a job up in Red Lake, Ontario if I got a float endorsement. Well, the only place in the wintertime that you can get a float endorsement is out here on the coast. So I came out and at Langley Air Services, Skyway Air Services in Langley, I should say, finished my commercial license off and got a float endorsement and headed back to Red Lake. When I get to Red Lake, there was an outfit called Wings Aviation, and they had 2 airplanes. They had just starting up that year. I was the first, I should say the second pilot, because the first pilot that was hired was Dave Winslow. He was the chief pilot there. He flew the Norseman most of the time, and then I got to fly this 180. Anyway, Dave Winslow was one of those people, again, I picked him as being a mentor for me. He taught me more about flying in the first 25 hours. Again, it kept me alive flying in the bush. That Norseman in the back was KVB. It was one of the old OCA airplanes. And the first 25 hours that I was in Red Lake, I got to fly around with him, sitting in the right seat, but every time we were empty, he'd let me take off and land and map read and all the other things that I needed to do. Then we got this 180, and he said to me, he says, "If you learn on a hard one," he said, "all the rest of them come easy." That was the fastest boat in Red Lake. It was a horrible performing airplane because it was all out of rig. At that time, I had no idea what having an airplane out of rig was all about. It just didn't fly good. But anyway, learning to get that thing off the water taught me a lot. Anyway, I spent the next winter, I should say, next spring, I should say, I decided it was time to move on. And Norcan Air in Lac La Ronge, Saskatchewan was looking for pilots. Now they were a pretty big airline compared to the ones that I was dealing with in Ontario. Anyway, what I did is I got to fly this airplane right here. And it was CF-FHB, serial number 1, first Beaver that was ever produced. And that was the first Beaver that I ever got a chance to fly solo. When I was going to be based out of La Ronge, but on the way up to La Ronge, they said, "Stop in Prince Albert, we'll get you checked out." So I did that. I flew that, but I wasn't flying that particular airplane all the time. Most of the time it was GQY. Anyway, as the summer went on, we were really busy at that time. I put in close to 500 hours in a little over 4 months. That's a lot of flying, let me tell you. Anyway, one of the things that we did to fly just straight charter work, We're getting paid 10 cents a mile. Can you imagine that? But we had roll tanks, and we would put them on the aircraft if fires started. And so that was this roll tank up here. There's two 47-gallon roll tanks, one for each float. This is a probe. I don't know if you can see that. Can everybody see that? Pretty hard to see. Okay, anyway, this is a probe that goes down in the water, always picking up water. So if you were going to fly around, you had to roll the tanks upside down and just dump the water overboard. Anyway, this one day, it was getting towards the end of it was beginning of the month, and I was short on miles, and then all of a sudden they got this fire going on. Oh, this is great. I'm going to make big money today. I'm up to 12 cents a mile. So that 2 cents a mile, I guess, was for danger pay. I don't know. Anyway, I did two things with that particular airplane. First one that I ever flew solo, I got to fly serial number 1, and I dropped my first load of water in anger on a real fire off of that airplane. So those are my 15 seconds of fame, I guess, is what you could say. Anyway, spent the summer working there, and then I went on to decide it was time to try for the airlines. And that's what I had originally thought I was going to do, was fly in the airlines. I'll become a rich, well-paid airline pilot, a big paycheck and a, what's the word I'm looking for? Keeps you going at the end of your career. Pension. There we go. Thank you. That's what I was hoping for. Anyway, that didn't really happen. So, an interesting story. I went to Alberta, went to Calgary, got the instrument rating, and then all of a sudden now I'm looking for a job. So I went back to Winnipeg. A lot of the guys that I had been working with in Red Lake had now moved to Winnipeg and were working for Aerotrades Western at the time. And so I had heard that they were there, and I didn't even know if there was a chance of getting a job. But anyway, walked in that day when I was looking for a job, and the chief pilot walks up to me and said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "I'm looking for a job." He says, "Oh, good." He says, "We're looking for somebody here right now." And he says, "I've got to make a trip. I got to get a trip done today. Got to get a package up to La Paz this afternoon." He said, "Would you be willing to do that?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." He says, what kind of twin time you got?" And I said, "Well, I just got my instrument rating." He said, "What did you fly?" And I said, a twin Comanche." He says, "You ever flown an Apache?" And I said, "No." So anyway, he says, "Ted, come here." He says, he took me outside. That was LQN. He says, "Get in the left seat over there." Got in the left seat. He jumped in beside me. He says, "This is this is that, this is other things." He says, "We'll start this thing up. Did you go on?" I said, and he's running, and he says, "Yeah." I said, "Everything's," he says, he asked me, "Is everything fine?" I said, "I guess so." I don't know. So anyway, he says, "Can you take this package up to La Paz?" I said, "Yeah, probably." So anyway, he said, "I'll be right back." Get up and sit in the airplane running. He runs in, gets this package, and he says, "Drop it off at Grace Lake," and he says, "Come back." Okay. So I fumbled my way out to the strip, and I got off, flew up to La Paz, landed there, dropped the load off, or the package off, turned around and came back. And he said, "Well, you made it back, eh?" And I said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, tell you what," he says, "tomorrow we'll check you out on the airplane." And so that's how it went. Anyway, I flew that Aztec an awful lot when I was there, and that was a couple of months later. Anyway, I was doing charter work with it. I became a medevac pilot as well for them. Now, they had decided that they were going to they tried to win a contract for a flying doctor around to all the different settlements, to all the nursing stations. When I was a kid, I thought there used to be a television program on TV called Australian Flying Doctors, and they used to fly these 3-engine Rovers all over Australia every week, saving lives. And I thought, man, when I was a kid, I used to talk to my mom and say, "Hey, can I stay up late to watch this program?" And she said, well, hey. Anyway, she gave in eventually. What ended up happening, they asked me if I would run this contract, and I said, "Yeah, sure." She says, "Come to Gimli Monday mornings, pick up the doctor, and wherever he says he wants to go, you just take them there and ferry them around. I said, okay. So I pull up in Gimli Monday morning. This guy comes walking out and he says, hey matey, how you doing? He says, my name's Vin King. He says, and I said, you're from Australia, aren't you? And he says, yeah. And he said, we got talking on the flight up, and he said, he told me that he had been an Australian flying doctor. So here was one of those happenstance things when I was a kid. I dreamed about flying a flying doctor scenario, preferably in Australia, but never got to Australia. But here I was flying Vin around all over northern Manitoba, doing medevacs and whatnot with him, sort of thing. So anyway, that was some of my time spent there. This company that I was working for did a lot of work in northern Manitoba when all of the hydro projects were being built at that point in time. So I did all kinds of flying for different charter work, and again, in the medevacs. So anyway, from there, what happened then is I had an incident where I had an airplane quit in the air on me and ended up putting in the ground, onto the ground, I guess, and it got kind of burned up a little bit at the end of that. So, of course, once you do something like that, they don't want to keep you around. So, anyway, I decided it was about time I went and thought about what I really wanted to do, because I had tried to get the airline job. I had basically blown that completely, and I decided the crop spring thing was going to be the thing for me. So I moved back to Manitoba, bought myself a little airplane, and I started flying, doing some crop spraying off of my dad's farm. Now, at that point in time, you didn't have to have an operating certificate. You could do what they call the flying farmer exemption. So that allowed me to fly within 25 miles of the center of my farm, which I had purchased one of my uncle's farms. Anyway, I did that for 2 years and realized that there wasn't enough in the flying at that point in time to be able to make a full-time career of it. Because what I was doing was doing farm chores, driving school bus, and a whole bunch of other things to make a living. What I really wanted to do was play with airplanes. So I decided it was time to move on and get myself my aircraft maintenance engineer's license. So where do I go? Back to Red Lake area, sort of thing. So Bourne Lake Airways was just on outskirts of Red Lake, and they were running that group of airplanes up here. There were Twin Beaches, Beavers, Otters, Norsemans. There was 185s. We had an Aztec down here. What I ended up flying most of the time was this single otter here. That one was VQD, serial number 466, the very last single otter that was ever built, sort of thing. So I got to fly the first beaver and the last otter, and among a bunch of other ones as time went on. The company I was working for then, Bourne Lake Airways, what I was doing was flying full-time, and Transport Canada said if I wanted to apprentice, that I could only record 1/4 of my time if I was flying full-time. So what was going to happen was going to take me 12 years to get my apprenticeship time in, get my AME license. I thought, well, that's no good, I can't do that. So I talked to Art Hageland, the chief engineer, and talked to him about it. And he decided, between him and I, that I needed to get on someplace full-time. So from there, I went to Red Lake Seaplane Service, which was basically across the bay in Red Lake. And so anyway, this outfit that I worked for there did all kinds of aircraft maintenance. You name it, we were doing it. We were doing all kinds of salvage work, complete rebuilds, everyday maintenance, 50 hours, 100-hour inspections, so on and so forth. This was just one of the salvage jobs that I was on. And when this was up in Norway House, Manitoba, and that's what I saw at 8 o'clock in the morning when we walked in there, down to that dock. And here was the aircraft. Basically, this is the water in the river there that was black and dirty. And a couple of hours, we basically were pulling it up, letting the water slowly drain out of it. And then about 10 o'clock, we actually had it up and sitting there. What we did is we pulled the magnetos off of it, drained the oil, dumped all the gas out of it, put fresh gas in it, fresh oil, 2 new magnetos, pulled all the instruments out, dropped them in a pail of diesel fuel, fired up the airplane, and 2:30 that afternoon, flew it back to Red Lake. So, and that was just one of the ones we did. This one here was up in Cross Lake. We ended up getting a call saying that the owner of this aircraft had landed on the ice just after it started freezing. This was just right after Christmas time, and he'd gone in on wheels. He had one of his employees who was pretty drunk in town, and he wanted to get him back out in the bush so he wouldn't drink as much. So he landed and taxied up to where he was going to drop the guy off, shut the engine down, and he said he stepped out of the airplane and the far side broke through the ice, went down. It actually bent the left wing right there a bit. Anyway, you can just see there's a bit of a crinkle in that wing. The aircraft dropped in, and then once it dropped in, he reached across, grabbed a hold of the passenger, undid his seatbelt, and dragged him out this side, and then the other side went down. And so by the time we get there, 2 days, 3 days later, minus 30 every night, the ice had thickened up. We landed the Aztec and the 172 on the ice, got all our gear out, and started working on this thing. We dug it up, we took a chainsaw and cut all the way around the airplane. We hooked what's called a dead man or an A-frame onto it, and slowly started to bring this thing up. And we had a heck of a time because we'd get it up so far, and then because of the big hole, it's weak, and that would pull everything down into it, sort of thing. So we had to start getting logs, and we put logs under the wings, and we eventually built it up. So we got the aircraft out of the water, and then it froze over, and we had a parachute on there, Herman Nelson. We were running heat in there, melting all the ice out of it. And so what we ended up doing, virtually the same thing. We drained the oil, drained the gas, pulled the magnetos off of it, put new magnetos on it, fresh oil, fresh gas. We fixed the wing, doing a jury repair. We had a system for doing a repair like that so we could bring the wing back down into place, temporarily bolt it with pieces of steel, angle iron, and then we could actually fly that. Everything would work, sort of thing. So again, once we got it up, we ran it, worked great. I flew it home. Every time you would fly one of these airplanes with that repair on it, that wing would always fly very heavy, but that was just because of all the garbage that was on it to keep the wing from folding up into a ball. So this airplane here is an interesting story about this one. This aircraft was owned by Lamb Air. Now, in 1946, Tom Lamb, who was the originator of Lamb Air from Manitoba, had gone to Nordine factory and wanted to buy a new airplane. So he walked in, and if you notice over here, that's what he looked, that's how he was dressed. Now, he was wearing a pair of bib overalls, a Mackinac jacket, fur cap, big winter boots. Walked into the factory in Montreal, said to Bob Nordine, "How much for one of them there Norseman airplanes?" He said, he looked at him, he said, "Well, Mr. Lamb, I don't think you can probably afford one of those airplanes." And old Tom says, "How much?" And he wouldn't answer him, and they went back and forth a little bit, and finally he says, "How much for one of those airplanes?" He said, "Well, it's $55,000, Mr. Lamb. I don't think you can afford that." Tom goes into his pocket, pulls out a wad, starts counting off cash money, rolled up that one, put it back in the pocket, went in the other pocket, pulled out and finished off $55,000 and put it in and got in and flew the airplane home the next day. So when I rebuilt this airplane, what I was going to do with this, I was pretty much in charge of rebuilding this one. But when we got finished, it's springtime. Snow was melting out of the bush, but the ice was still good. So we had it on skis. I said to the boss, I says, "You know what? I'll take it back to Buffalo Narrows. I'll put my motorcycle on the back, and then I'll fly it home. It'll be a great adventure for me." And I told the boss, I said, "I'll charge you 10 cents a mile." He said, "Well, that way I don't have to fly an airplane up there to get you back." And I said, "Okay, fine." So anyway, when I ended up planning the flight out, I was going to have to get gas someplace. So I called them up in La Potte, Grace Lake, and said, "Hey, I'm flying a Norseman. up to Buffalo Narrows, I got to get some gas. Can I buy some gas from you? He says, yeah, sure, what's the registration? And I told him. He said, oh, well, we'll be looking forward to seeing that when I get here. So when I landed, these two guys come out. That was Doug and that was Connie Lamb, sons of the original Tom Lamb, who had bought the airplane in 1946. Filled up the airplane, had her a little bit of a visit, and they says, come on upstairs. Went into the hangar, up to the mezzanine floor, rooted through a bunch of boxes, pulled out a logbook, and it was the very first logbook that the day he bought that airplane and flew it back to Baclaw. Anyway, that was a kind of an interesting, and there's a lot more tales that go along with that airplane, getting it to Buffalo Narrows, but I'll leave that in the book for you to read. So I finished up there. I ended up getting my AME license. By that time, I had what they called an A license then, and I wanted to get into my own business. So I started my own company in Surrey, Manitoba on SFTS number 17. It was a World War II training base that they had flown Admiral Ansons out of. They had 128 Ansons on the field at its busiest time. I built that little hangar right there, and I owned that. I bought that house right on the very edge of the field. So every day all I had to do was just drive down the taxiway, and then I was at my hangar to work, sort of thing. So I spent 20 years with General Air Care. And so what we were doing at the time, my intent was then aerial application to fly and aircraft maintenance and overhaul to keep my fingers in the pie is what I really wanted to do. So I also had a chance to get involved with the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan Museum in Brandon. The day I got my AME license, I was still in Red Lake, and I was sitting there having a cup of coffee, and I read in a magazine that the Air Museum in Hamilton, what's the name of it? Warplane Heritage, right. Warplane Heritage were looking for an AME. And I thought, ha, this is for me. I got a brand new license in my ass pocket that the ink is still wet on, sort of thing. They have to accept me, I'm sure. So I wrote a resume, cover letter, fired it off, expecting, 3 or 4 days later I'm going to get a call from them and I'm going to go and fly warbirds for the rest of my life and work on warbirds. Well, that didn't happen. In fact, they still haven't called me back. I don't know what's... Anyway.
It's in the mail.
It must be. It must be. And we're on strike right now. So anyway, what ended up happening, the Brandon Museum was just nicely getting started. At that point in time, they had a Harvard, that one right there, and that Tiger Moth, which is that one there. And that was the first two flying airplanes that they had. So I became heavily involved with them, and what they wanted to do was build a couple of airplanes, or rebuild a couple of airplanes. So this PT-26A Cornell had sat in a field at Saskatoon from 1946 to about 1980, 2 or 3, somewhere in that vicinity. There was a tree growing up through the frame when they found it, sort of thing. So they decided that was going to be the first airplane that they were going to add to the fleet that they wanted to build themselves with the help of the volunteers and my own organization, because they needed somebody to be able to sign the airplane out and make sure that it flew properly. Sorry. Prior to starting to work on this, I had already acquired enough time, apprenticeship time, then to write what they call my B license off in that day. So the B license was basically the structures license. That was a 5-year apprenticeship. You had to be able to do the work. Transport Canada made you write all long answer exams to pass this thing. Anyway, when I acquired my license, I was probably the only B licensed engineer between Winnipeg and Regina. So I ended up going around doing a lot of inspecting of other people's work so that I could sign it out after major repairs and modifications on the aircraft. So anyway, when I test flew this airplane, we had found the engine actually on a snowplane. And we took the engine off the snowplane, sent it down to the States, had it overhauled, came back. We had to build a new propeller for it, or get a new propeller for it, brand new, because we couldn't find one. So anyway, when I got out of the airplane after the test flight on that, I remember saying to the people who were standing around, I said, this airplane is so nice to fly, so easy to fly, says even your grandmother could fly it. And I don't think I've ever flown an airplane that's been easier to fly than what a Cornell is. That tiger moth there, well, we'll just move on yet, because I'll come back to the tiger moth in a bit. At the time, I was also involved heavily with the Manitoba Aerial Applicators Association. They were in the process of trying to get a good reputation. Basically what we were considered to be was the cowboys of the industry. So anyway, what ended up happening is, I think there was about 35 operators in Manitoba. We got together. Manitoba government said, you have to have chemical drift insurance and PLPD insurance on your aircraft. And so we all sat down and we said, hey, Manitoba Public Insurance Corporation, if you will supply us with an aggregate, we'll create an insurance policy, which we did, and is still in use to this day by the Manitoba Aerial Applicators. Saved these guys an awful pile of money going that way. But some of the other things that we used to do is we put on spray clinics. Now, if you notice right here, that's a computer tape that was laid out across the ground, and we would fly across that tape and spraying out a special dye that was in the water, and it would form droplets on this piece of paper. We would take that, run it through a computer, and it would tell us where there was heavy spots, light spots, and we would end up with the best possible spray pattern that you could imagine with the airplane. You know, that was one of the things that we were trying to do. We did a whole bunch of other things. We had to deal with provincial government for everything that the provincial government wanted. We had to have some kind of a license to satisfy them. So we worked with the Manitoba government quite a bit. Across Canada, there was applicators associations in every one of the provinces. But there was no Canadian Aerial Applicators Association at that point in time. So what we did, we all got together, all the provinces got together, had our first convention, and we formed the Canadian Aerial Applicators Association to deal with anything that was federal or international. Some of the things that I got involved with, because I was president of the Manitoba Aerial Applicators for 4 years, and because I was president of the Manitoba Association, I was represented in the Canadian Aerial Applicators, and I became a Canadian president for 4 terms. And so some of the things that I ended up dealing with was free trade, open skies policies. We were writing the Canadian air regulations at that time in Ottawa, so I was back and forth trying to write stuff for the aerial applicators to make life better for us, sort of thing. And so anyway, we dealt with a whole mess of industry requirements. One of the things that we ended up doing was we were required by Transport Canada at that point in time, as an operator, to have what they call a maintenance control manual in place. Now, this was a requirement of the new Canadian air regulations that we're in the process of writing as we were doing this. So the aerial applicators at a convention decided that we would, all of us across Canada, there was 450 spray planes in Canada at the time, we were going to need to have a maintenance control manual for every one of those airplanes is what it came down to. So there was 3 of us from the Manitoba Aerial Applicators Association said, let's write a maintenance control manual and submit it to Transport Canada and see if they'll approve it. So we did that. We sat down, wrote it, they looked at it, a couple of very small changes, and they said, yeah, that's exactly what we're looking for. So what we said then, if we can use this as a master copy, we're going to replicate copies for everybody in the industry. We'll sell them a membership in the Canadian Aerial Applicators Association and this new maintenance control manual. So we gave it to them at a very, very cheap price. And here we were, the cowboys of the industry, were the very first people in Canada to meet that requirement by Transport Canada. Transport Canada was kind of surprised that we walked in and we had everybody in the country already under that manual prior to the requirement of it ever started. And that year they were kind of picky and said, if you don't have it, you don't operate that year. Well, because of that, every operator in Canada joined the association. So it was a kind of a hand in hand. It went very well for everybody. So this was just some of the things that I got involved with over the years. Did a bunch of forestry spraying. The first year this took place in high level Alberta, there was 2 of us went up there with 2 sprayers and 2 bird dog airplanes. We sprayed something like 50,000 acres in a 2-week period while we were up there. Alberta government liked what we were doing. They were up there recording everything. We had helicopters flying beside us as we were doing all this, recording all this, everything that we were doing. The next year we went up there with 8 airplanes, 8 sprayers, a spare one in case we needed one, and we had 4 bird dog airplanes. And we sprayed 500,000 acres up there that year and the next 2 years after that. So we took care of the spruce budworm population fairly well. Anyway, as time was going on, I was sitting at home one night, we were watching television, and there was a program on TV came on about an outfit in Los Angeles, California, who was doing air combat experiences down there. They were flying Italian-built airplanes. So that day, that night, I must have been drinking more than I should have been or whatever, but I got the idea that maybe I better start an air combat business in Canada. So I started the first one. I went to Transport Canada, walked in one morning and said, I'd like to take people who've never been in an airplane in their lives, put them in the front seat of a Second World War advanced trainer, take them up, do some aerobatics, some more formation flying, and then let them get into a dogfight. What do you think? That'd be a good idea? I thought they were going to say, what are you even smoking this morning? But anyway, they didn't. I was lucky. There was one of the guys there was an ex-fighter pilot, and he thought this was a great idea, and he helped me get through this whole process. We put it together, had it working pretty good in Manitoba. But Manitoba, you can drive for days and not see another person sort of thing. So there wasn't enough population out there, so we decided we're going to move it over here to Boundary Bay. And so I moved the airplanes out here, and oh, here we go. Sorry about that. I was going to dismiss this. Just this. Some of the things that we did with this airplane, these airplanes I should say, we had cameras on board. There was one we called the hero shots up front in the front cockpit. That was a camera facing forward to record if you were chasing somebody. There was a camera mounted right in the back here, which was facing back, wide angle lenses to record being chased. And there was a camera that we built into the wings here. Now if you notice those cameras there, they're not those little GoPros that you get today. Those things would have been so sweet. Anyway, these things were just basically security cameras. We had 4 of them on each airplane. There was 8-track, not 8-track, the VCR tapes, VHS tapes in the recorder under the back seat. We had a dwell control that we could control whatever camera we wanted to at the time, or we were just going to an automatic swing. We flew air shows with these airplanes, did demonstration flight, dog flights, formation flying, and aerobatics with them. We put replica 30 caliber machine guns on it, propane fired, the only ones in Canada, or any place in the world that I know of that are actually approved. I had to go through the approval process with Transport Canada. We were starting to carry oxygen bottles and propane side by side. They get kind of excited. But anyway, they went ahead and they said, okay, that's good. This is, how are we doing for time here? Ooh, all right, we'll move on as fast as I can. When I was working with, involved with the museum, we had a requirement one day to do a memorial flight over the apartment buildings in Winnipeg. So this is Winnipeg here. And so what ended up happening, Air Command's on the airport. I took the Harvard from Brandon, flew into Winnipeg, and went up to the briefing room up here on the airport. They said what we're going to do is we're going to put together a 5-flight, airplane formation, a Vic formation, and we'll do the flyby over the military, and they're all lined up along Memorial Drive in front of the apartment buildings. So at first they were saying, well, you can lead this formation with the Harvard, and then one of the guys in the thing said, well, he's not military, he can't lead anything, he doesn't know enough. And I said, that's fine. So the idea for me then was to take the airplane and go over to the Provencher Bridge and just loiter there Well, they took the tutors, flew up to Stonewall, or sorry, Stony Mountain, I should say. They formed up there. They were supposed to follow that railroad track down, and then they were supposed to follow this down here. There's a big rail yard in Winnipeg. It's probably 6-7 miles long, probably 3 miles wide there. Really easy to see. And then they were supposed to turn and fly over top of the Parliament buildings, which were right there. So then as soon as they were to go by, we would follow them down. They were going to come down Memorial Drive, blow number 3 out, and do a missing man formation, break over top of the Parliament buildings and go back to the airport. They were really, really concerned about me being at my altitude, making sure that I knew what I was doing. So they had given me one of their backseaters. We went out there, we were just flying around waiting for this all to happen. They took off, went up to Stony Mountain. Tower was talking to us. They're formed up, they're now coming down from Stony Mountain. They're following the railroad tracks. And then they said, you're there at your 2 o'clock position, your 1 o'clock, they're at 12 o'clock position. They told me specifically, make sure that you're at this specific height. We will be at that, we will not be 1 foot below or 1 foot above. And when they said, the tower said, you're 12 o'clock, I'm doing like, I can't see. It was a great easy day, I'll give it that. But these guys should have been right in front of me, about a mile at the most from where I was. They weren't there. For when I first spotted them finally, at about my 12, well, it would have been 12 o'clock. They're already 400 feet below where I was. 4 miles from where they're supposed to be, and they were coming down this part of the city. So I said to the guy in the back seat, I think we better get down Memorial Drive because I have no idea, I can't see them. I lost them in the haze over the city. So I just rolled the old girl over and back and did a steep left turn, picked up as much speed as I could, went down across Memorial Drive. All the military were lined up and looking up, made her bark as much as I could, pulled up over top of the Parliament buildings, and at that point in time, down here someplace, they saw me profile. So what they did, I turned, went back to the airport. They came around, coming backwards, went down Memorial Drive. At the over top of the Parliament buildings, they blew the missing man and then went back to the airport. So I'm sitting in the briefing room where the both of us were sitting waiting for these guys, and you could have cut the air with a knife. It was really stressful around there. They weren't happy with the fact that they had missed the target completely. Anyway, another thing that we did with the museum was I was involved with the filming of For the Moment. Russell Crowe, Christiane Hurt were the stars. And anyway, this was the filming crew that was there. As a note, this airplane here was airworthy at that time, back in 1992, I think it was, or 93, that this was filmed. So anyway, my involvement with the museum was fairly heavy back in those days. As time went on, by that time I was starting to have some issues physically, and things weren't working for me, sort of thing. But anyway, I got the aircraft. My 2 harbors moved out to Boundary Bay here. That summer, what I did is I came out here and we flew this Aztec doing a salmon enhancement program. What I was doing was I was spreading liquid fertilizer in the lakes to enhance the algae growth, so when the fingerlings leave in the fall, they're much bigger than what they would have been. So I spent that summer watching what was going on after I'd come out, hired the right guys, I'd given them instructor ratings, aerobatic instructor ratings, and kind of watched them keep going or get going as the summer went on. In the fall, then I went back to Manitoba, and basically I was shutting my business down. I wasn't feeling good, but I decided I was going to shut my business down. And so what I ended up doing then is I went to work on a contract, Manitoba Government Air Service, and I was flying this single otter. This particular airplane had water bombing floats in it that would hold 185 gallons of water altogether. Where I was going to be was in northern Manitoba at a place called Garden Hill on Island Lake. So there was a district fire base there, And so I operated out of that for most of the summer. So what would happen is if a thunderstorm went through, there's computer programs that mark all the lightning strikes as the lightning strikes are happening. So the next afternoon, we'd fly to that area. Oops, went back, wrong one. We would go the next day where the lightning strikes were happening and basically be looking for what they call puffers coming up out of the bush. So the fires would be just getting started. I would end up flying over, we'd circle it, I'd talk to the fire boss that was sitting beside me, and we'd decide where we'd drop them off, the closest lake that we could get to, unload the load. Now we had what they call a ready table on there. There was 5 guys, tents, pumps, hoses, food, shovels, axes, everything that they needed for fighting fire. And they would dump that off on the shore. As soon as they unloaded that stuff, I'd push away, I would fire up, and I would go and I'd start picking up water, dropping water on the fire until they got there with hose. So once they got there with hose, they'd get on the radio and say, hey, we're on the fire. I'd say, okay, great. So I'd go back, pick up another group, and I'd go and we would find other fires. And that's how basically we kept it down. When you got small fires, it's easy to take care of a fire, even with a small airplane. 200 gallons, or 185 gallons, I should say, and you can control it until you get somebody with a hose on there, and the fires are usually taken care of. I spent a bit of time up in Churchill working with the polar bears. These were kind of interesting. There's a couple of hundred polar bears between Churchill and York Factory. We would fly them on a fairly regular basis, doing counts to make sure that all the bears were as good as they could be. As they were starting to migrate north in the fall, we would, if they were coming through Churchill, we'd try to trap them, and then we would take and do a rap sheet. All the data was on each one of the bears. There wasn't any of the bears that were not marked, and we would fly them out either in the airplane or most of the time we'd put them on a net in a helicopter and take them out. You don't want one of these guys coming awake inside the airplane, but I've had cubs that actually did wake up on me in the airplane a couple of times. After I finished that, it was time to do something different. So I had finally spotted the Mars when I was doing that SAM enhancement program. I didn't even know the airplane existed before that. And so I decided that I wanted to fly that particular airplane somehow or other. So I figured, well, I got to get some more water bombing time, heavier machinery and stuff like that. So I ended up going up to Yellowknife and spent some time with the ice pilots up there. This was just before the filming started to get going, and I knew all of the characters that were on that television program, and I flew these DC-4s and did a lot of firefighting there, and I also taught in the School of Aviation that they had set up in Yellowknife during the winter time. This airplane here, I should give you a little bit of, we ended up getting called down to Billings, Montana. The US was burning up that year, and we went down there for 6 weeks to fight fire. So we were sharing the fire base with this airplane here and that one there. This was Tanker 123, that was Tanker 121. They are privateers. They were the Liberator bombers that the Navy had with the tall tails. Anyway, what ended up happening, we got to know these guys quite well. These guys didn't stay around, but we were there pretty much the whole time with these guys. We toured each other's airplanes. We would go out for supper at night and stuff like that. Anyway, the last night that we were there, we got called out in the fire 60 miles south, and they called it the Willie Fire. Willie Nelson was playing in the town that we were fighting the fire up in the top of the mountain beside it, sort of thing. So that's how it became the Willie Fire. We followed Tanker 121 in, and we had trouble with our left engine, so we shut our number one engine. We shut our number one engine down and followed them in, made the drop, and then said, we're gone mechanical, we're out for the night, sort of thing. We went back to Billings, landed. The next morning, we got released to come back to Canada. So what was happening is they were catching up on fighting fires. This particular airplane stayed in Billings for the next month and then went down to Idaho. And this aircraft here, in a turn, left-hand turn, lost its left wing. The wing departed from the aircraft. Both these two guys, Rick Schwartzen and Milt Stolak, Both perished in the fire. There's a song called Last Flight of Tanker 123. It was an interesting, great song. I loved it because it commemorated these two guys, and both of those guys, really decent guys. So anyway, I finished up with the ice pilots and said I got to get to do some flying on the Mars. At that point in time, there had been a breakup of the company in Port Alberni. The flying tankers had been originally owned by Macmillan Lodell and Weyerhaeuser in the States, and a few other smaller companies. So they decided that was it. Weyerhaeuser wanted to get out. MacBo, I should say, wanted to get out. Weyerhaeuser bought up the helicopter side of it, and Timber West came in and bought the Mars, both Mars. Timber West is a logging company and has not a clue of what a big airplane is all about, especially when it comes to fighting forest fires, but they figured that they wanted it at the time. So what had happened is the company had basically broken up. A lot of the original pilots and crews got frustrated and left because there was just so much kerfuffle there, but that gave me an opening. A crop sprayer from Manitoba, and ended up getting on to fly the Mars. I flew the Mars for 1 year, and I flew it over into Alberta, and it was the first time I'd ever left Manitoba, or sorry, left BC to go to Alberta. This was us getting loaded up and ready to go. This guy right here, Jim Vissers. He is Sydney Tires Vissers, by the way. And he passed away from glioblastoma 3 or 4 years ago now, unfortunately. He's long gone. This was Roy Copeland. There's nobody in the world knows more about the Mars than what Roy does. One of the best mentors I've ever had when it comes to dealing with those kind of airplanes. And this was Dale Weiberg, a good friend of mine. He's passed away now. So there was, that was old LYL Interglory, and that's what she is, how she looks sitting outside here. The next, that fall, I ended up getting diagnosed with hepatitis C. And so I went spiraling down in that deep, deep hole. I spent a whole year on an interferon treatment, 144 rounds of interferon ribavirin. If I knew then what I know today, I would have said, let me die, because it was the worst thing I've ever had to go through. But I got through it, cleared the virus, but had quite a visit with the Hep C angel, that's for sure. It took me a bit of time to climb up out of that hole, but when I did, I ended up going back flying, and I became the first commercial Fireboss pilot in the world. This was the prototype aircraft, and this is a crop sprayer on floats that can pick up water. Gee, what have I done all my life? So anyway, that gave me the opportunity to fly that airplane. The contract that we flew that summer was a poor contract because there was only, I think, 40 fires by the time we got finished. You know, normally where we were stationed in Sudbury, Ontario, there was something like 350 to 400 fires, but we didn't get that. But anyway, that was the beginnings of the Fireboss, and now I think there's 200 and some of them flying around the world today. Coming back from there, I went to work for Viking. I had never had anything to do with manufacturing, so what I ended up doing, my job was to be the completion coordinator for the DHC-6 Twin Otter 400 series. It was a babysitting job. I hated every minute of it, to be honest, because it had nothing to do with airplanes really, other than, yep, okay. I just wanted to move on. Anyway, after I finished that project, ended up going down to South America, to Fuerza Aérea, Argentina, and rebuilt tanker, or sorry, not tanker, but T-82, which was a 1967 Twin Otter built in Canada, and they needed a rebuild by that time. When we finished this airplane, there was, this was when we were just firing up the engine, the one engine the first time. That was when we did the test flight on it. When they landed, the crew got out and they said, it flies like a true blood. That was one of the best compliments I think we could possibly get at that point in time. There was all kinds of military parades going on. I had spoken at a number of different parades before I was through, and they were very happy. But there was one guy, I'm going to back up 1 second, and I'm going to do this quickly. This fellow right here was Commodore in charge of the aircraft maintenance. Him and I didn't get along good at all, sort of thing. Every Monday morning we would have a meeting, and I was wearing a Viking jacket one day, and I was sitting right beside him, and he reaches over, pounds on my chest, he says, "You're wearing the Viking jacket." He says, "You're the enemy." I got up, I took the jacket off, and I threw it on the floor, and I says, "I'm here to make this airplane fly, and that's what I want to do." But he didn't trust me very much at all. So at the end of the rebuild, he said to me, he said, "We were successful because of you, and we were now able to rebuild all of the airplanes in the fleet." And he says, "I can offer you a job as a project manager to rebuild the rest of the fleet. You are one of us." So I had won him over, which surprised me, to be honest. This particular airplane was a veteran of the Malvinas Wars or the Falkland Islands conflict. And if you'll notice this black patch up here, it's the silhouette of the islands. The aircraft had done 2 medevac flights, and these are paintings that were done of that particular aircraft. And this was just 2 of the guys that I ended up working with. A great bunch of guys at the end of the day to work with. Came back from there, went to work for Okanagan College. There wasn't anything happening here in Victoria when we finished that, so I spent about 7 years at Okanagan College teaching aircraft structures. From there, moved back to Victoria. I became director of maintenance for the Victoria Flying Club at the airport here, and I was the person responsible for maintenance. And I did that for 3 years. So my involvement with the museum started in 2017, and it still goes on to this day. Anyway, 2 accomplishments I'm very proud of. When I was 15 years old, I became a Queen Scout, and I was really happy with that. I took a lot of things out of that training and whatnot, and that made me, I guess, who I am today. And I'm proud of this award, the Award of Excellence for the outstanding contribution towards the betterment of aerial application in Canada, March 1973. So anyway, there's a line from the song Hot Rod Lincoln, and we had flames coming out from the side. Feel the tension, man, what a ride. I said, "Holy pup shit, man, it's been a hell of a ride, and you know what, I would do it all over again in an instant." Thank you. I didn't mean to go on that long.
Perfect. You sure you haven't left anything out?
Actually, there's probably about 300 pages that I left.
And you can read about it in his book if you wish to buy one. Well, Murray, thank you very much for coming today. You're one of our own, and boy, oh boy, it just shows the real depth that we have in this museum here. So that was absolutely wonderful. On behalf of the museum, I'd like to offer you this slight libation here.